When James J. Jeffries was just a kid, his family left their quiet farm in Ohio and headed west to the booming city of Los Angeles. He was only 7 years old, but the move marked the beginning of a life that would become the stuff of legend. In the heat and hustle of LA, young Jeffries grew up fast. He was strong, quick, and built like a locomotive. Before boxing ever crossed his mind, he worked as a Boilermaker, wrestling iron and fire all day long. That job didn't just toughen him up. It gave him a nickname that would follow him forever, the Boilermaker. By the time he was in his teens, Jeffries had already begun fighting for fun, lacing up gloves and stepping into the ring as an amateur. Every punch he threw carried the strength of a man who knew hard labor. But by age 20, Jeffries wasn't just fighting for sport, he was fighting for something bigger. He turned pro, and from the very start, it was clear that he was cut from a different cloth. In just his third professional bout, Jeffries stepped into the ring with Hank Griffin, a fighter many respected and few dared to face. 14 brutal rounds passed. Then, with a sudden surge of power, Jeffries dropped Griffin to the canvas. The crowd exploded. That knockout went echoed through the boxing world. Years later, Jack Johnson himself would fight Griffin 3 times, proving just how dangerous the man had been, and what it meant that Jeffries had beaten him so early in his career. Next came Gus Ruin, the top contender and no easy man to beat. The two clashed in a back-and-forth battle, both men trading heavy blows. But in the final round, Jeffries uncorked a thunderous shot that sent Ruin crashing to the floor. The bell rang before the referee could count him out, and the match was declared draw. The crowd didn't buy it. Boos filled the arena. The people had seen what Jeffries did, and they believed he deserved the win. Then came 1898, the year that would push Jeffries to the brink of history. First, he faced Peter Jackson, a towering figure in the sport, known far and wide for his incredible skill. Jackson had been so good that John L. Sullivan, the former champion, had outright refused to fight him. Jackson had only ever lost once, more than 13 years earlier. But none of that fazed Jeffries. In just 3 rounds, he dismantled the veteran, knocking Jackson out and forcing him into retirement. It was a seismic moment. Jackson was a legend, and Jeffries had crushed him. But the road to the top wasn't over yet. Just a month later, on April 22nd, Jeffries squared off against Mexican Pete Everett. The fight didn't last long. Jeffries, full of momentum and raw confidence, overwhelmed Everett with a storm of punches. By the 3rd round, it was over. Another knockout. Another name crossed off the list. Then came the Irishman, Tom Sharkey, a rough, relentless bruiser known for taking a punch and giving 2 back. The two men went to war for 24 rounds. It was a clash of wills. In the 11th, Jeffries dropped Sharkey to the mat, but the Irishman got back up. Still, Jeffries outworked him, outpunched him, and in the end, he earned the decision. It was another huge win. The whispers started turning into roars. Jeffries was the real deal. Still, one more hurdle stood in his way. Bob Armstrong, big, fast, and smart in the ring. His jab was like a whip, and his feet moved with the grace of a middleweight. But Jeffries was a tank with fists, and after outboxing and overpowering Armstrong, there was no more debate. The path was clear. Jeffries had earned his shot at the greatest prize in all of sports. The World Heavyweight Championship was within reach, and the Boilermaker was coming for it. On June 9th, 1899, under the blazing lights of Brooklyn, New York, James J. Jeffries stepped into the ring for the biggest fight of his life. Across from him stood Bob Fitzsimmons, a former champion, a master of movement, and one of the deadliest punchers the sport had ever seen. But Jeffries wasn't just there to fight. He was there to take the crown. For 11 rounds, the two men battled. Fitzsimmons was slick, clever, and full of tricks. But Jeffries kept coming, each round chipping away at the older champion. Then, in the 11th, Jeffries landed the punch that changed everything. Fitzsimmons crumpled. The count hit 10. Just like that, James J. Jeffries was the new heavyweight champion of the world. Not long after, Jeffries packed his bags and crossed the Atlantic. Europe was calling. Fans across the continent lined up to watch the American giant in exhibition bouts. He wasn't just a champion, he was a showman. Early motion picture cameras captured moments of his fights and exhibitions, flickering images that still survive today, silent, grainy proof of a champion in motion. Back in the States, the business of defending the crown began. First up, a familiar name, Tom Sharkey. The two had gone the distance before, and this time would be no different. For 25 grueling rounds, they went at it again. Sharkey came to win, but Jeffries outworked him, outlasted him, and when the final bell rang, his hand was raised once more. His next defense was lightning fast. Jack Finnegan barely had time to blink. Just 45 seconds after the opening bell, Finnegan was flat on his back, the fastest knockout in heavyweight title history at that time. Jeffries walked out of the ring without breaking a sweat. Then came James J. Corbett, the master boxer. Corbett danced, dodged, and jabbed with flawless technique. For 23 rounds, he made Jeffries look human, until the Boilermaker snapped the illusion with one sudden left of the jaw. Corbett hit the canvas and didn't get up. It was a brutal reminder. Jeffries only needed one opening. In November 1901, Jeffries got the chance to settle an old score. Gus Rulin, the man who had escaped with a draw years before, was back in the ring. This time, there'd be no doubt. By the fifth round, Rulin had taken enough damage. Between rounds, his corner tossed in the towel. The score was settled, but nothing tested Jeffries like the rematch with Bob Fitzsimmons on July 25, 1902. Fitz came in throwing fire, sharp, punishing punches that tore Jeffries apart. His nose shattered, his cheeks split, blood poured into his eyes. For 8 rounds, it looked like the end. But then Jeffries found something deep within. In the 8th, he unleashed a brutal right to the body and followed it with a thundering left hook. Fitzsimmons went down and didn't move. Jeffries, battered and bleeding, had turned the tide with pure will. He faced Corbett one final time in August 1903. This time, there were no surprises. Jeffries dominated every round. Corbett's corner surrendered in the 10th, tossing a giant fan into the ring to signal the end. Jeffries' final title defense came against Jack Monroe. It wasn't close. In just 2 rounds, the Canadian was done. Jeffries had proven everything there was to prove. Over the course of his career, Jeffries did more than win. He wrecked bodies. He broke the ribs of Corbett, Rulin, and Sharkey. He retired undefeated in May 1905, never once hitting the canvas in his prime. After stepping away from the ring, he stayed close to the sport, serving as a referee and watching as others try to fill the void he left behind. They say some of Jeffries' fights are lost to time, never officially recorded. But one thing is clear, before his first retirement, no one had ever beaten him. Not once. The Boilermaker had stood tall, unshaken, and unbroken. The summer of 1910 was hotter than ever in Reno, Nevada, and not just because of the 110-degree sun. Something bigger was brewing. A fight was coming. A fight so big it was called the Fight of the Century. And at the center of it stood 2 names that lit up headlines across the country. Jack Johnson, the reigning champion, and James J. Jeffries, the undefeated ex-champion, rising from 6 years of silence. For more than 5 years, Jeffries had lived in peace, far from the roars of the crowd and the sting of leather. But he couldn't stay hidden. The press hounded him. Fans begged him. Promoters waved piles of money in front of his face, more than he'd ever seen. He was offered a guaranteed $40,000, and promoter Tex Ricard sweetened the deal with another $75,000 personal contract. That kind of money in 1910, it was enough to pull any man from retirement. But Jeffries wasn't the same. When he first agreed to fight, he weighed a staggering 330 pounds. His once rock-solid frame had softened. Meanwhile, Jack Johnson was lean, fast, and dangerous, sharpened like a blade from years of defending his title against anyone who dared step forward. Johnson had broken through the color barrier by destroying Canadian champ Tommy Burns' back in 1908. That victory shook the world, and not everyone was ready to see a black man wearing the heavyweight crown. Some fans and papers turned Jeffries into a symbol, calling him the Great White Hope. But to Jeffries, it was personal. He said, "It is my intention to go right after my opponent and knock him out as soon as possible." His wife, more honest than the press, just hoped it would be his last fight. Fight day came, July 4th, 1910. Ringside seats, originally $50, were being scalped for $125, over $4,000 today. People climbed over walls to get in. More than 1,000 fans stood shoulder to shoulder, desperate to witness history. At 12:57 p.m., Jack Johnson climbed into the ring first, as his contract always required. Superstition, confidence, ritual. He stood tall, sweat already running down his back in the brutal heat. Then Jeffries entered. Leaner now, he dropped over 100 pounds in training, but still carrying the weight of expectations, his own legacy, and the eyes of a divided country. The bell rang. The first 3 rounds were cautious. Johnson had read the stories that no one could control Jeffries on the inside, but he had a plan. Late in round 4, Johnson tied up Jeffries' arms and twisted them behind his back, just for a moment, but enough to show the world who was in charge. Then he landed a clean overhand right. The message was clear. From rounds 5 through 12, Johnson owned the ring. Jeffries was wilting, under the pressure, under the heat, under the truth. In round 13, Johnson started turning it up. A right to the head, then an uppercut. Jeffries staggered. Johnson could smell the end. Round 15 was the breaking point. Jeffries backed into the ropes. Johnson launched an uppercut that snapped his head up. Then 3 more, fast and brutal. Jeffries crashed to the canvas. For the first time in his career, he was down. He got up, but he was in a fog. Johnson clipped him again. Left hook, this time sending him through the ropes, half his body hanging out of the ring. A second helped Jeffries up. He looked lost, shaken, a ghost of the man who once ruled the ring. Johnson moved in and dropped him again. That was it. Jeffries' corner threw in the towel. The fight was over. The old champion was done. Johnson had won. Not just the fight, but the moment, the noise, the legacy. Later, he said, "I knew it was over in the 4th round when I landed that uppercut and saw the look in his eyes." The old ship was sinking. Even John L. Sullivan, the ex-champion who once refused to face black opponents, admitted it openly. The best man won. Johnson fought clean, smart, and strong. Jeffries never stood a chance. The world changed that day. Slowly, loudly. After the fight, Jeffries never returned to the ring. He spent his remaining years training young fighters and promoting bouts from his ranch in Burbank, California. Out behind his house was the Jeffries Barn, a place where boxing lived on in the shadow of its once undefeated king. In 1953, James J. Jeffries passed away quietly in his home, with his niece by his side. No headlines, no fanfare, just the silence of a life that had seen glory, defeat, and everything in between. He was buried at Inglewood Park Cemetery, and the legend of the Boilermaker, his rise, his reign, and his final fall, was carved into the heart of boxing history forever. And so ends the saga of James J. Jeffries, the Boilermaker who rose from the rail yards to rule the boxing world, who walked away unbeaten, only to return for one last war under a blazing Nevada sun. His story is not just about fists and titles. It's about pride, pressure, and the price of legacy. A man dragged back into the spotlight by a nation desperate for a symbol, only to discover that time, once lost, cannot be reclaimed in the ring. Jeffries gave everything. His strength, his silence, his myth. And in losing, he helped shine a light on a changing world. A world where greatness wasn't measured by color, but by courage and craft. He stepped through the ropes one final time. And though he didn't leave with the crown, he left with something deeper, a place in boxing's most unforgettable chapter. Some fighters are remembered for their victories, others for the battles they chose to fight. Jeffries will be remembered for both. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true tales from the golden age of boxing. Until next time, keep your guard up and keep your passion burning.